Good evening and welcome to On the Line with Nigel West, who will be talking about China or Beijing's intelligence services. And I can assure you this is going to be a fascinating discussion. He's also got quite a fascinating story about himself, which I'd like him to share as well. As always, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavour to get through as many of those at the end of our discussion. And also we must give a big shout out to our funders, which is the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. Nigel, thank you so much for agreeing to join us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, as promised, I'd like to kick off before we get to your book, just to show everybody your book. I'd like you to tell me that story you told me when we met last week about how you got into writing, because you've written quite a lot of books and articles about intelligence services from all over the world. How did that come about?
Well, I've often wondered where it all came from. And looking back on it, I think that the catalyst was a teacher. I was educated in a Benedictine monastery, and one of the monks who I became acquainted with because I had a shotgun as a child and was a regular shooter living in the country. And the school that I went to had a monk who was in charge of the shooting society, and he would arrange rough shooting on Wednesday afternoons every week. I mean, it seems bizarre in today's world that 14-year-old boys were encouraged to bring their shotguns to school, but that's what happened. And this particular monk, his religious name was Dom Joseph, but his real name was Henry Coombe Tennant. And we learned that before he took holy orders, he had been an officer in the British Secret Intelligence Service, and that his best friend in the service was a man that we recognize today as John le Carré. And the two of them would talk to the small group of impressionable boys when we were cleaning our guns. And we became enchanted and allowed into what I suppose we regarded then as the secret world. There is a different way of reading newspapers. There is a different way of seeing the world, and that's through the eyes of an intelligence officer. And Henry Coombe Tennant had been a guards officer during the war. He'd been captured at Calais. He had been taken to a prisoner of war camp where he had spent 2 years, and he was part of an escape after 2 years there over the fence, and about 30 British officers escaped. And Henry literally walked from Silesia in eastern Germany right the way across Europe to the Dutch border, made contact with the underground system there, then went across France, climbed the Pyrenees, walked across Spain, got to Gibraltar, was repatriated from Gibraltar, brought back to the United Kingdom, where he was posted to the planning staff of Special Operations Executive because he had this unique experience of life in Nazi-occupied Europe in several different countries. And he operated for SOE, then was parachuted into Belgium in 1944 as a JEDBA, which is a trio of an American, French, and British intelligence officers, and they liaised with the local Maquis and underground and supplied them with weapons and gave them guidance. And then at the end of the war, Henry joined the Secret Intelligence Service and went on to become a member of the Baghdad station. And there he had some bad experience. I've never discovered what it was. And he had some kind of a breakdown. And then he decided to leave SIS and take holy orders. So when I met him in the early 1960s, he had literally just retired from SIS. And one of the things that he told me was to read a book that was in the school library called The Venlo Incident, which had been written by one of his SIS colleagues, a man called Sigismund Payne Best. And I read the book, and Dom Joseph said, "What do you think? Did you enjoy it?" And I said, "I find it frustrating because he never used the real names of his contacts or his colleagues." And Henry Coombe Tennant then explained to me about compartmentalization, about security, about networks, about protecting sources, and so on. And on that basis, I came to understand that Sigismund Payne Best, far from being the hero of the book that he had written, he was actually something of a rogue and had tried to blackmail his former employees, the Secret Intelligence Service, who had not looked after him particularly well. So there were two stories, two versions of everything in the intelligence community, and that fascinated me. But ultimately, by the age of 15, I had a pretty good working knowledge of the British Secret Intelligence Service and the British Security Service, MI5. So that was a good grounding for me. And when we weren't being enchanted by Henry and his belief, for example, let me give you just one little anecdote. When he left SIS, his personal safe was opened just to make sure he hadn't left any classified information, paper documents in his safe. They found an apple. They couldn't understand what an apple was doing in his safe. And they went back to Henry and said, "Henry, why is there an apple in your safe?" And he said, "One of the things that I learned walking across Europe in 1942 was that you can live on an apple a day." So Henry was quite extraordinary. And it was only after his death a few years ago that some of us discovered that part of his problem had been his role in the death of an innocent German, I think some kind of night watchman, who Henry had killed in the course of his escape across Europe. We were never quite certain about what it was, but that was apparently eating away at his professional life all the time that he was in SIS, and that may have been part of the incentive to join the Benedictine order. And on Friday afternoons, when John le Carré was living in London but had a home in the country in Cornwall, he used to drive past the gates of the monastery, and he would pop in if it was convenient and give a talk to the boys. So we sometimes were listening to these remarkable stories from Henry Coombe Tennant. And on the other side of it, you've got John le Carré giving, we had no idea who he was. He just had success with the spy who came in from the cold, but we didn't really know who he was. But he came out with all of these remarkable stories. So we, aged 15, we were pretty well briefed. And as a consequence of that, a group of my contemporaries devoted themselves to the intelligence community and remained in it for the rest of their life. A contemporary of mine, Mark Allen, was a very impressive Arabist, and he headed the falconry society at school, and so he was quite unusual walking around the school with a falcon on his arm, and attended lessons with a falcon sitting on his desk. And he became an acknowledged Islamic scholar, wrote a wonderful book called The Arabs, and few people realized that his entire career had been spent in SIS. And better than that, he was the architect, along with a partner of his from the CIA called Steve Kappers, to opening up Libya and getting Muammar Gaddafi to admit to the terrorism of the loss of the Pan Am jet over Lockerbie, and opening up his biological and chemical and nuclear research facilities, the laboratories in Libya, to international inspection. And Mark was awarded a knighthood for that particular achievement. So there was a group of youngsters from this particular monastery that devoted themselves to this other life.
That is a fascinating story. There's a book there for sure talking about where you all ended up. And what a great, as you said, grounding in the world, the secret world. Is it possible for you to read a newspaper without thinking about intelligence?
No, and it's very helpful. I find it reading between the lines, recognizing particular past operations, seeing some of the personalities involved, and understanding the need for secrecy. Let me just tell you, in terms of secrecy, Henry Combe Tennant used to tell this wonderful story, which sort of illustrates the mystique around the British Secret Intelligence Service. His family had a home in Norfolk near the Sandringham estate. And after he was recovering from his escape from Gibraltar, when he hadn't been assigned to SOE yet, he was walking across a field in the afternoon, and he met a couple also taking a walk in the afternoon, and it turned out to be the King and Queen. And he turned to them and acknowledged them, and they said, "Who are you? And why aren't you in the army?" And he said, "Oh, I'm an intelligence officer, sir. My name is Combe Tennant, and we have met before because you awarded me the Military Cross, and you gave it to me yourself." And he said, "How marvelous. You must dine with us this evening at Sandringham. My daughter would love to meet you." So he agreed to go and have dinner at Sandringham with the King and Queen and Princess Elizabeth. And he sat between the Queen and Princess Elizabeth. And the Queen turned to Henry and said, "Now, dear boy, I understand you're a very important member of the Secret Intelligence Service. If so, you must tell me what my nephew does, because he is in the Secret Intelligence Service and he won't tell me. And his name is Lord Elphinstone." And Henry said, "I can confirm that Lord Elphinstone is indeed a member of SIS, but I cannot tell you what he does or what I do." And there was a long silence, and the Queen turned to the King and said, "Will you order Combe Tennant to tell me what my nephew does as a job in the Secret Intelligence Service?" And the King leaned over to Henry and said, "Don't tell her a word. Not a thing. She's very indiscreet." And he didn't.
This has got to be written into a book, Nigel. But we must also talk about China. I think I could spend the evening listening to your anecdotes about your teachers from school. It would appear, but it also does go to show that an inspiring teacher can lead to great things in his or her pupils, I think. So to China. I think we've had a conversation last week, and one of the things that's really struck me is, and the way you've sort of described it, that the way the Chinese intelligence services is nothing like the way the intelligence services in the West operate. Can you elaborate on that, and what do you mean by that?
Yes, from a counterintelligence perspective, the way you study a foreign or hostile intelligence agency is to identify some of the membership, keep them under surveillance, watch for any weaknesses, try and make a recruitment of one of the officers, or alternatively, if you've identified one of the officers, try and recruit a dangle, somebody who can act as a double agent and be cultivated by your target, and then hope that they develop a relationship which is more beneficial to you than to them. And by surveillance, both technical in terms of monitoring their communications and physical, their movements, you build a picture of your adversary. You create a wiring diagram. you hope that you will attract defectors who will tell you about the internal structure of the organization. And once you've learned its location, and once you've attacked and maybe got access to some of its communications, and maybe recruited a source inside the organization, you can then try and take control of that organization. So that's the normal counterintelligence methodology that is applied to dealing with a hostile intelligence agency. None of that applies to the Chinese. Why? Because the Ministry of State Security is a vast organization. Secondly, it is impossible to run surveillance operations or intercept operations in Beijing. Thirdly, the Ministry of State Security isn't a single monolith. It has branches and bureaus in all the various different provinces across the People's Republic, which operate independently of each other. And the difficulty about applying the conventional methodologies that I've described, the problem there is that we don't get defectors. Very occasionally, so the last really important defector that we had was in 1985, where a Ministry of State Security official who was very senior and the adopted son of the chief of MSS, so he was pretty well informed, he fell in love with a French girlfriend in Hong Kong and ultimately defected to the Americans. And he was given the code name Plainsman. And that's why there were so many espionage cases in 1985, because Plainsman was able to give an inside account of the Ministry of State Security, its personalities, its procedures, its targets, and this was unprecedented. Problem is that we haven't really had a high-level defector of that quality since 1985. So it's very difficult to mount these classic conventional counterintelligence operations against an organization the size of Ministry of State Security, particularly when we don't even know the individuals within a consulate or an embassy overseas that may or may not be doing double duties, in the sense that an MSS officer will be acting as a consular official during the day and then fulfilling his MSS duties during the rest of the period. So it's hard for us to understand MSS, and their methodology is so different. They will assign a single case officer to one target and will work on that target for up to 20 years before they agree to cooperate with MSS. The methodology that they have adopted is dangerous to westernize, but it seems to work for them. And it's easy to forget that one of the most important penetrations of the CIA, which was the longest penetration of the CIA by any hostile outside intelligence agency, was not a Russian organization. It wasn't a Soviet penetration. It was Chinese. And that was Larry Wu Tai-chin, who was the senior Chinese analyst at the CIA. For 32 years, he had access to all Chinese intelligence coming to the United States, and he was in a position to neutralize much of it. But it wasn't really until 1985 that we began to understand how the Ministry of State Security works. And in some respects, to a Western conventional intelligence officer, their standards and their objectives, and not to mention their procedures, are completely alien. So our intelligence agencies are there to counter terrorism, are there to protect proliferation of atomic weapons, weapons of mass destruction, attract defectors, recruit individual agents. Chinese don't do that. What they're interested in is Falun Gong, which is like a cult or a religious organization. And they persecute Falun Gong and put the adherents of that cult, that religious movement, under very intense surveillance. They're interested in Taiwan as a priority, in Tibet as a priority. They're interested in the democracy movement and the Uyghurs. No Western intelligence agency would ever accept any of those targets as being a legitimate target when they are particularly preoccupied with counterterrorism and counterproliferation. So we have an understanding of MSS, but it is very limited. And all that we can do is monitor their operations that go wrong when they're detected. And what we have understood from that is that the resources that they throw at intelligence collection overseas is on a scale that you cannot imagine. 700,000 Chinese students in the United States, all will have been approached at some stage by the Ministry of State Security. They are only able to work overseas with the consent and the compliance and the approval of the Ministry of State Security. And the Ministry of State Security will make a bid to recruit somebody time and time again. They don't take no for an answer, and they will be pretty obvious, no subtlety involved. So it may start off with, you can help what they call the Middle Kingdom, but then they will turn it around into Guanxi, which is family obligation. And they will put pressure on other members of the family to make sure that the individual they're interested in gets the message that they should start cooperating with MSS. So it's a very unusual organization, and it's very hard to persuade anybody to defect. And the operations, when they do go wrong, generally speaking, they're backstopped, and there's no political fallout in Beijing.
So it's not just Chinese nationals either that are, shall we say, exploited or utilized, if you like, as an intelligence asset. We also hear a lot about companies like Huawei. And you also mentioned earlier before we started that it's not just, as I say, Chinese nationals. It may be people that have, maybe second generation US citizens, for example, that, originally came from China whenever their family moved there. So, 700,000 students is a lot of people, obviously, but it's much, much bigger than that, isn't it?
It certainly is. And all ethnic Chinese are regarded by the People's Republic of China as not being Canadian citizens or American citizens. They're Chinese. They owe a loyalty to the Middle Kingdom. They owe a loyalty to their own ethnic group, and they will be reminded about that. They will be offered, if they occupy an academic post, for example, in the United States, that is engaged in research that is of potential military or economic interest to the Chinese, they will go out of their way to make a recruitment. And they will do that in a variety of different ways, particularly with the ethnic Chinese. At one stage in the 90s, it was very unusual that they attracted or pitched anybody other than ethnic Chinese. And so for academics, they would invite them to visit a university, perhaps in the province where their family came from originally. They'll do research to try and find members of that family and reunite them. And if they can't find authentic members of the family, they'll just invent some. And they'll use that as pressure on the target. They'll say, there is somebody who needs state help in your extended family back in the Middle Kingdom, and it is your duty to help. You've been successful. Your family moved to the United States. You are successful. You are a graduate. You're a leader in your particular field. Don't you think you owe it to the rest of your ethnic group to come back to China and to give something back to the Middle Kingdom? And that kind of pressure acts powerfully on ethnic Chinese. And of course, in terms of recruitment, the British and the Americans have always tried, where there is let's say, Hong Kong Chinese, Hong Kong British, to recruit them, because they will find it much easier to operate and escape hostile surveillance. And so even when that happens, cases can go wrong. And we then learn that 4, 5, 6 different CIA officers, ethnic Chinese, originally from Hong Kong, have been caught working for Ministry of State Security. So this is an ongoing problem. And again, in recent years, there has been a slight shift in emphasis towards economic targets, and that includes agricultural products, methods, proprietary information, coding, anything to do with protected information relating to computer systems. All of that is regarded as fair game by the Ministry of State Security, who will sponsor individuals to go and enrich themselves by stealing information in the United States. But if they can get the information back to the People's Republic, then they will be rewarded a second time. And it's in some cases, the Chinese agents have not been paid by the Ministry of State Security. They've been stopped, let's say, at San Francisco airport, trying to leave the country with a flash drive containing proprietary information relating to a particular industrial system. It doesn't matter what it is. But when they've been arrested on those occasions, very often it turns out that they haven't been paid by MSS. The deal is that they take this proprietary information exploited in the People's Republic and then acknowledge a protection from MSS. But the individual agent is allowed to enrich himself or herself. So it's a self-financing, very ingenious, but very troubling methodology behind the espionage.
So you're saying then that the agent acquires the knowledge, goes to China and effectively sells it to a Chinese company where it can be turned into a product or something along those lines? Is that how they are financially rewarded?
Yes, and in many other models, they will collect information as a student or as an intern working for some aerospace organization, and simply walk out of the compound or the classified area with a storage device and use that storage device to leverage a deal with the Ministry of State Security, who are perfectly happy for that individual to be rewarded. And bear in mind that all the universities in the People's Republic all have research branches. They're far more commercially minded than their Western counterparts. And those research organizations are under the control of the Ministry of State Security.
Crikey. So what about companies? Like, I mean, we've all heard of Huawei, but I'm sure there are others. I mean, how does the People's Republic of China exploit their corporations or utilize their corporations?
Well, first of all, anybody traveling to the People's Republic with a laptop need to take a laptop that's completely empty, that does not have any of their past communications or any other extraneous material, because all of that will be copied and taken without the knowledge of the owner. Where there is some kind of a partnership system, that this simply exists purely for Western consumption, but they don't really exist. If there is some kind of deal done between a Chinese company in partnership with a Western counterpart, it doesn't matter whether it's an elevator system, an escalator, or a new food product, whatever it is, that will be stolen, exploited by the Chinese. And it may well be that the partner will, as well as paying lip service to a particular commercial deal with a Western counterpart, a Western supposed partner, they will also be running in the background another wholly Chinese company exploiting that proprietary information that is at the basis of that commercial enterprise. It is really quite astonishing and quite ruthless.
So I'm guessing you're going to say that it was right for, I think the British government decided not to use Huawei in 5G infrastructure, and the US government, I think beforehand, decided the similar thing. Is that the right thing to be doing, do you think?
That's it's sort of a judgment above my pay grade, but it is worth everybody involved in such a decision fully understanding what they're dealing with. Huawei is not a conventional independent organization or company. It's run like a fiefdom by a father and daughter. So the father is the president of the firm, his daughter is the chief financial officer, and he was in the People's Liberation Army, and his entire background has been state funded. And so the idea that Huawei is not connected with Beijing is sort of laughable. I mean, nobody took any notice of that. Nobody believed it was a mere fig leaf. And so when Huawei was bidding for, in effect, being the sole supplier of the British internal communication system and the infrastructure across the whole of the United Kingdom, this was a step too far. And the Americans insisted that the British government not put all their eggs in one basket with Huawei. And that was a crisis at the time, and it has now sorted itself out. But the fear was that if, in the event of a political crisis, there was a moment when the Chinese could be in a position to neutralize, let's say, nuclear power stations across the United Kingdom, or the water distribution system, but by a flick of a switch in Beijing, that would be immensely damaging to the United Kingdom. And there are plenty of people who believe that what we are seeing now in terms of the cyber attacks on Jaguar Land Rover and other organizations that are key components of our economy, that this is just testing the water. This is a potential adversary, maybe Russia, maybe Chinese, maybe organized crime, who are flexing their muscles and to see what can be done. And that is pretty terrifying when you consider we nearly sleepwalked into a deal with Huawei. And just to give you an idea of what's at stake here, Huawei was so anxious to get that deal done and to take control of our systems that it actually agreed to an arbiter being set up to monitor Huawei's systems with staff that came from GCHQ. And that arrangement has lasted, but it has never worked, because all that has happened is that Huawei has collected more information about GCHQ than GCHQ has been able to regulate within Huawei.
I mean, realistically, it would be impossible to carry out due diligence on a Chinese company, wouldn't it? I mean, I don't think that's what we're even talking about, is it?
It's laughable.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that a conventional intelligence agency in the West would not favor one particular company over another. They wouldn't engage in economic espionage in order to promote the interests of Lockheed, for example, in preference to another American company. All the companies involved in China are all state-sponsored. All of them have a relationship with the MSS. So you're talking about a completely different scale of challenge from the Chinese. Having said that, in military terms, there are some things that have not been tested. For example, everybody that sees the threat to the West, to Western interests at the moment, are conscious of the People's Liberation Army, the People's Liberation Army Navy, nuclear developments, and the threat to Taiwan. We all understand the threat, and we accept it. But here's the thing. It turns out that the Chinese are so, what's the term when you're preoccupied with a sort of mythological threat that is related to the movements of the moon?
Yes. Yeah. No, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
The Chinese are very reluctant to go on a submarine that is going to submerge. They're very superstitious.
Yes. Yeah.
And that superstition prevents, we think, prevents the People's Liberation Army Navy from being effective. Let me give you a couple of other examples. We're not sure that the People's Liberation Army can fight. Now, that may seem strange, but there are two reasons for this. First of all, they haven't been as successful, they haven't been engaged successfully in any military activity since the war with Vietnam, which they almost lost, and before that, the Korean War. So we don't know the ability of the People's Liberation Army to fight a war, to engage in real combat. Secondly, and this is an absolutely critical key point that is overlooked by many commentators, the one-child policy in the People's Republic of China means that over a very long period, two parents only had one child. And if that child, and that is the child that they are relying upon for their future wealth and for their pension and to look after them in their old age. If that one child joins the People's Liberation Army, there will be very strong parental influence over that child not to put themselves in danger. So the Chinese have now altered the one-child policy, but the fact is that the PLA is filled with single children. And that creates a very significant potential problem for the Chinese. We don't know if they were to attack Taiwan, which would, for many years, American strategists have guessed that that would be the flashpoint of a future conflict. And if that happened, the assumption would be that the PLA, millions of them, would overwhelm Taiwan. But if you look at the Straits of Taiwan, it's a complete death trap. And there will be very considerable pressure, as I've mentioned, on the children from the parents not to fight. So the threat may not be quite exactly as we see it.
I was going to ask you about Taiwan actually, because I mean, I've been reading a lot about, obviously, there's, the world's best semiconductors and chips are all made in Taiwan. And so the impact of an invasion on the global economy and everything probably would be very serious. And I know you're not in the business of making predictions, but given what you said about their approach, I mean, it's very likely that Taiwan is thoroughly penetrated from an espionage and intelligence point of view. Would you agree with that, or is it because?
Yes, the case is there are a continuous drip, drip, drip of relatively senior, excuse me, relatively senior Taiwanese officers in the Air Force and in the Navy being recruited by Ministry of State Security. That happens from time to time. And the difficulty is that Taiwanese law doesn't make espionage illegal. They have other sort of statutes, but it's quite difficult to get an espionage conviction. It's part of the culture in Taiwan. So we're never entirely certain about the degree of penetration, as you described it, into Taiwan. But what we do know is that the same families exist on the mainland as have existed in Taiwan. Let me give you an example. Plainsman, the Ministry of State Security official who defected in 1985, it turns out that his uncle was a general in Taiwan. And this was a family secret that had not been shared with anybody else. And so there are quite a lot of families that have this sort of cross-fertilization over the Straits of Taiwan, and that important families in the ruling families in the People's Republic actually have members of the same family in Taiwan. And so it works both ways. And the Taiwanese have been actually very effective in their intelligence collection in China, albeit not against the Ministry of State Security.
I mean, this might sound a bit of a ridiculous question, but is there any sense, or do you get any sense of what the Chinese people want? Because obviously we're talking about state ministry, state institutions. Obviously, you still have the bond of family and individuals, as you've been describing. Do they want to go to war over Taiwan? Do you have any sense of that? Does the intelligence services have any sense of that?
Well, again, it's very important when one's looking at the Ministry of State Security to understand that the Ministry of State Security is not there to protect the people of the People's Republic of China. The Ministry of State Security's role is to protect the interests of the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China. So you have to think of Xi as riding a tiger, that there is a political, a social, and a cultural movement in China, for example, from the agricultural villages, people moving into the towns and cities, an industrial revolution. You can call it whatever you like, but it is dramatic what has happened in China in the past 30 years. And if you take a look at all of that, you can see that the position of the Communist Party is very uncertain. And so what they're trying to do is to retain power. They may have created this gigantic middle class. They may have encouraged many members of this new wealthy elite to travel overseas. But what they're interested in is not the welfare of the people living in China. It's the continued control over the power by the Communist Party. And they've been taught this by the Soviets. So when the Soviets set up the Ministry of State Security, so it was the KGB that did this, the KGB's emblem is the sword and shield, and that is the shield to protect the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and the sword to smite the enemies of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And that's what was exported to China. And that's why the Ministry of State Security is not interested in the welfare of the people. They're interested in keeping control over the party, the Politburo, and the leadership of the party.
I was going to ask you what you see the sort of, I don't mean the end game, I don't mean the outcome in 10 or 20 years, but what, if you like, the aim of the Chinese government, the Communist Party is. And I think what you're saying there, and correct me if I'm wrong, it is quite literally to stay in power at all costs, really.
Yes, you can't tell me that it is part of the communist creed to encourage Fortnum and Mason to open branches across China. But what is part of their creed is to create conditions under which the Middle Kingdom, as they call it controls the world. And it's not an aspiration or a hope. It is a certainty from their point of view that a global control will be exercised. It may not be for 50 years, it may not be for 75 years, but it will happen. That is the central belief of the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China. And it's very effective. And that's truly what they believe.
Wow. Okay, I've got a couple of questions here. Just a reminder to everybody in the audience, if you would like to put a question to Nigel, please put it in the Q&A and we will endeavour to get through those as many as possible. I'm not sure who's asking this question. Should planning permission be given to the new Chinese embassy in London, or is it too big a risk?
No, I don't think that it's a risk, but the difficulty is that the decision by the Chinese to acquire this site was taken at a time when Her Majesty's government, as it then was very keen on promoting inward investment from the PRC. And I think that it was pretty naive looking back at the David Cameron era with George Osborne trying to encourage the Chinese. And although there have been literally thousands of prosecutions in the United States of people who have engaged in espionage on behalf of the Ministry of State Security, there haven't been any in the UK. I mean, we know about Barry Gardner receiving £500,000 from his Chinese sponsors, but it was naivety that I think led us to the position where we haven't jailed a Chinese spy for years. There's been plenty of activity in Hong Kong, but that's a different matter. So I think that it's probably too late to prevent the Chinese from greatly expanding their presence in London by staffing these new premises. But I guess that will also be an opportunity for us to exercise a degree of control over their movements and over their communications, and give MI5 the opportunity to practice some of their surveillance techniques.
Do you think we have the resources? Do you think we have enough resources allocated to intelligence?
That's a very difficult. You've raised a fascinating question, because every time a minister says to the Director General of the Security Service, "Are you doing a good job? Tell me," the DG will say, "Secretary of State, I can't tell you how efficient we are. We're really good at what we do, but I can't tell you because it's classified." And so it's very difficult for an outsider to judge the performance of an intelligence agency. Do you go by defectors? If you say a key method of assessing the efficiency and the integrity of an intelligence agency is its ability to attract defectors, then we're in trouble. Because between 1947 and 1972, we weren't able to attract a single Soviet defector, not one, between 47 and 72. And it's worth saying that during that period, there were plenty of KGB and GRU defectors to the United States who all said the same thing. Why didn't you, when asked, why didn't you defect to the British? They would say, oh, too dangerous, they're penetrated. So it wasn't until 1985, with the defection of Oleg Gordievsky, that we could put our hand on our heart and say, we don't think that we're subject to hostile penetration. So is a minister going to be briefed? Is he going to understand the various different methods of judging the efficiency of an intelligence agency? Difficult to say. A former Director General of the Security Service who was responsible for running the organization during the 9/11 era said, oddly enough, one of the first things he had to do was to send half the staff home when 9/11 happened, because on the basis that they were on a war footing, they needed to staff the organization 24 hours a day. And that meant sending half the staff home to do a night shift. So I can't answer whether or not an intelligence agency has ever been known to say, we've got more than enough money, thank you very much indeed.
When you say it like that, it seems unlikely, doesn't it? Okay, a couple more questions. Ron says, so interesting, thank you. Don't the Chinese know everything that's going on with their spying system by now? I mean, I guess that's also about asking, what do you see the vulnerabilities are? I mean, you've talked about this superstitious nature, but do the spying agencies have any vulnerabilities that you're aware of?
We're talking about vulnerability of the Ministry of State Security.
Yes, sorry.
Well, there is only one way to run counterintelligence operations against hostile actors, and that's to attract defectors. It means setting out your stall and saying, here is the alternative. So in the Soviet model, we would say to the KGB, would you like to defect to us? If so, we guarantee you the pension immediately payable of a lieutenant colonel. We'll give you $1 million and a house with a swimming pool in Florida. And we'll take care of your extended family as well. And in return for that, we want good information. That's the way you catch spies. It's spies that catch spies. All this nonsense that you read in the newspapers about extravagant spending or unexplained wealth, it's all nonsense. That no spy has ever been caught like that, or with a polygraph. You catch spies by attracting defectors. And we need to attract defectors. And that's why the Secret Intelligence Service a week ago announced that they were going to have a portal on the dark web. And why have they done that? Because the most difficult moment for a potential defector or a potential source who is always going to be self-recruited makes contact with SIS. That is the most dangerous moment. They need to be certain they're dealing with the real thing, that it really is SIS, and they need to be certain that there's not going to be blowback if something goes wrong. They're not putting themselves, their friends, their family, their tribe, their race, their nationality at some kind of risk. So the best way to deal with an intelligence agency is to adopt the counterintelligence aggressive strategy of attracting defectors. And that makes them very nervous indeed. And there are lots of stratagems that you can adopt. For example, during the Cold War, we often used a strategy called the gangplank pitch. The gangplank pitch is that supposing you know that a KGB officer based in London is returning to Moscow, and maybe they've been approached or they've turned down an offer, a pitch made by the British. When they get to Heathrow, or when they get to the ship that they're going to return to the Soviet Union on, they will be given a card by a man in a Macintosh, and it will just simply say, if you need us, the next time you get to a third country, call this number. And maybe they'll tear up the piece of paper, maybe they'll put it in their pocket. You don't know. That's called the gangplank pitch. What's so wonderful about the gangplank pitch is that there is an obligation on the Soviet intelligence officer to declare that he's received it. So when he gets back to Moscow, he'll say to his boss, guess what? I had a gangplank pitch when I was coming on the ship. And the superior officer will immediately think, aha, is he reporting this because he's not going to use it? Is he reporting it because he is going to use it? Is this a cover because he's already been compromised and is acting on behalf of a hostile agency? So that kind of behavior is considered to be aggressive, but it's very effective.
And it's got a great name as well, it has to be said. So Ron goes on to say, we haven't seen on TV for a while anything about the Chinese guy, I obviously can't remember his name either, who was close to Prince Andrew as well. Is that typical of Chinese operations? Is that just gone away?
Yes, it's absolutely typical that this guy who had been cultivating Prince Charles should have had a relationship with the Ministry of State Security. But what seems to have happened is that when he got to Heathrow, his laptop computer was removed from him, and the content included a message that he had written boasting about his proximity to Prince Charles and the opportunities that this gave for developing a relationship in the future. And that sort of boasting, I think, indicates that he was not a Ministry of State Security officer himself, and there's nothing in his background to indicate a sort of period of 2 or 3 years where he would have been taken off for training in his CV. But it does make clear that he is in contact with the Ministry of State Security, and that was enough for the Duke of York to be given a friendly nod and a warning about this guy, and for other people who are in sensitive positions to be warned off him.
Mm. To be clear, we're talking about Prince Andrew here, not now King Charles, are we?
Yes,
no,
exactly.
That's all right. No, I just wanted to check because I could be wrong. Nigel, our time is nearly up. We've asked all the questions. I'll just check to see if there's any more. I have to say that's been absolutely fascinating. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I really enjoyed our preamble that we had last week. I would say keep writing the books, but I have no doubt you will continue to do so. And I would absolutely love to get you on the podcast again when you've written your next book. So please do get in touch, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thank your audience.